The Blocktalk podcast started because of my passion for the property management industry. I wanted to start a conversation and add some value within the industry with a diverse range of people and professionals who can add something extra. As we start out, my aim is that the podcast offers some useful insight into a variety of views, opinions, thoughts, and foresights from our guests, who include business leaders and industry experts. If you enjoy the podcast and want to find out any other information, head on over to brianwelsh.co.uk. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blocktalk podcast. Today we're doing a special roundtable episode, and we're joined by Hardip Devsi, Reid and Chris Ashurst. So Hardip has worked for the Scottish Government since 1998, and he's been in IT actually for a long time, which interests me, but we'll maybe talk about that at a separate time. Hardip's currently the head of Cladding Remediation Unit for the Building Standards Division within the Scottish Government. Reid is a past president of the Property Managers Association Scotland and a member on the Scottish Government Cladding Stakeholder Group. He's also the CEO of James Gibb, which is where I know him from, and I know him very well. He's been on the podcast a couple of times before. Chris Ashurst is also a homeowner representative on the Scottish Government Cladding Stakeholder Group, but he's also the group coordinator at the High Rise Scotland Action Group and has been there for a couple of years. So guys, thanks very much for coming on. I'll just go straight into the first question, if I may, and I'll ask this to David, actually. Could we start by each of you giving your view on how things are going with cladding remediation? David, do you want to?
Yeah, sure, Brian. I mean, at the highest level, and I have said this previously to you in the past, Brian, that is the most challenging issue that I've ever come across in 25 or 24 years of residential property management. So, well, it's everyone at the beginning was feeling their way through this situation and the complexities surrounding it. And at the highest level, I would say that it was never ever likely to be a tick boxing exercise. Predominantly, it was about making sure post Grenfell that people could put their head in their pillow at night and know that they were safe in the building in which they lived. That then kind of took us into areas where people were finding themselves not managing to get mortgages, people not managing to sell their property because questions were starting to be asked about building standards post Grenfell. And obviously, without getting into the full detail of it, the Hackett report and the information that came out of that about what was on Grenfell in terms of material not being the detail that had been submitted to planning, and then that brings us way forward to where we are today. Insurance has been one of the biggest challenges because the insurance market has hardened significantly, and homeowners throughout our industry have felt the pain of that. There's several stakeholders involved in this whole scenario, which, in fairness to Scottish Government, they sought about bringing all those stakeholders to the table to highlight their own challenges. In terms of factoring industry, we certainly at the outset identified that, and again, probably because most people didn't recognise that it wasn't part of a factoring remit, where we were facilities managers, we're not project managers, surveyors or other, and the complexities from a construction and technical point of view was always going to be a challenge for us, let alone other challenges that I'll come on to very quickly. So, not being our remit, the factoring industry, different companies took different approaches to it. I can only speak for my own organisation to say that we wanted to assist homeowners as best we could because it was a stressful and very serious issue. The biggest issue I see, and I've said from the outset, is that the freeholding tenure in Scotland has probably been the unintended, or as the unintended consequence of freehold tenure, where the duty holders are the collective homeowners and trying to engage with an industry that suffers from apathy in order to find the solution to the problem, getting homeowners together via the title deeds and what it dictates in there, whether it's the Tenement Act 2004, whether it's the Property Factors Act 2011, whether it's the Building Standards Act 2006 or the Fire Safety Act 2005, trying to join all that up.
Yeah.
And the first thing that we asked for was amended primary, secondary, amended legislation. And again, a whole bundle of complexities arrived through that. And Scottish Government, amongst the other stakeholders, stood up to the challenge, pulled us all together, identified, listened and learned from the freehold challenges, the autonomy and empowerment being with the duty holders, which is collective homeowners, and trying to find a way in which we could move it forward. So I have to say that given the fact that everyone has felt their way through this, to roll forward at least 2.5 years, Hardip, you maybe correct me if I'm wrong, we're in a better place than we've ever been. We've definitely, we had 5 developments in the pilot, actually now became 6 because 2 buildings in the same development have been split out at the present moment to attack it. So certainly we are seeing progress. Out of the 6 developments, 2 have probably been a result of Scottish Government's Accord programme and engagement by them coming back to the table, and no doubt we'll speak about that. The other 3 are underway via homeowners groups and or James Gibb alongside Scottish Government, and 1 is still working its way through. So yeah, I would say we've came a significant long way. Yes, it's been a long period of time, but I think as an industry, we are certainly in a better place in the last few months than we've ever been in the last 2 years. Okay.
I mean, I guess it's true to say that this has been a massive amount of work for Factors as well. I mean, I know that there's a huge amount of work by everyone else, but I mean, this is work that you guys have got to get involved in that you would not necessarily have got involved in if these sort of things hadn't happened.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back, without labouring the point, if you go back to the Cabinet Secretary's announcement on the 12th of May when it was recognised that it wasn't Factors' remit, we as an organisation have been doing this free of charge until recently, once we get involved in the facilitation of the grant funding that's been put up by Scottish Government. We're starting to be able to apply some of our costs, but I mean, it has been that aspect of it has ran at a loss, because our job and our remit is to manage the facilities management, the insurance, the ground maintenance, the cleaning. But again, that's another kind of education problem within Scotland and the community, as homeowners understanding, because they always get it confused with leasehold. And leasehold, you have a landlord who's obviously driving this type of thing forward. Yeah. You don't have that in Scotland. They don't recognise that they're the duty holders and they've got collective responsibilities. So it has been a huge drain in resource. There is absolutely no doubt about that, Brian. And we will never recover it, but at least it's been recognised and it's going some way to facilitating our involvement now, after 3 years worth of involvement. And some other property factors have taken the decision not to become involved for those reasons, but that, I only speak from our own organisation again, and morally that challenged me not to assist homeowners. Okay,
cool, thanks for that. Chris, do you want to come in now and talk about your view on how things are going with the cladding remediation?
Yeah, I mean, I think David's summed it up pretty well, but from someone sitting in an apartment which is subject to an SPA, or for some people, they don't know whether they are or not. I think the process from across the piece, what I'm getting in my ears from homeowners across mainly Glasgow and Edinburgh is this is taking too long. I'm not assenting to that comment, but I understand that comment, utter frustration at what people perceive to be delay. Having worked with David Reid, the working group, Hardip and the team, I know that people are working at it, and it isn't a deliberate delay. People are actually working their socks off trying to get it sorted. But if you aren't getting information, and a lot of owners are not, then they don't know what's happening. They are either scared of the costs, they're scared for safety, and they're still, some of them are still in that position, simply not knowing what's going on. And if you're one of those people, fortunately I'm not, we have a very good factor who is just brilliantly helpful and has really been engaged in the process. And I know, as David has said, his own firm has been really engaged, but there are others who have, for whatever reason, chosen not to engage with their owners. And for those owners, this is a time of anger and fear, and really the communications that we need to get out, and I've banged on about this often, as David will witness, and Hardip too, we need to communicate better somehow directly to the owners, and I think there is a route to do that. But I think every owner in a building that could potentially be the subject of an SBA will get a communication. I mean, I've just had being of a certain age, I've just had my latest COVID appointment through the door. And so they can manage to get that to people, so something into the hands of the actual owners needs to happen. It may not comfort them, but it will give them some sort of certainty.
It's at least it's a known unknown rather than unknown unknown, I guess, isn't it? So just having something is better than having nothing.
So I think that's, if you ask owners, if you go around Edinburgh, wherever, or Glasgow, or wherever, that is the biggest thing. I get accused of all sorts of things and not getting on with it, but and that is the frustration in people's hearts, and their care for themselves and their families, and it's difficult to argue against that. From the other side, of course, the thing is that what we've got into, as David has pointed out, we've never been in this situation before, and the SBA is a good idea. You end up with a building with, is this safe or is it not safe? But the questions that we thought we were asking 18 months ago are still the questions, but in asking them, that has uncovered more questions that need to be asked of a building, and that has added to the time scale and the complication of it, and that has to happen. And we knew that this was a pilot process. We were piloting away. We were trying to find out how this is going to work. And that has uncovered things that we perhaps weren't really considered. Okay, well, we need to think about this as well. So it is a bit like Topsy, it's grown.
Okay. Thanks for that, Chris. So Hardip, can you, from a Scottish Government point of view, having listened to all that, and also obviously everything you're involved in, your view on how things are going with cladding remediation?
Thanks, Brian. I think that to give a bit of context, we, in terms of the government, within weeks of the Grenfell Tower fire, set up the Ministerial Working Group for Building and Fire Safety. And then, as a result of the ongoing issues in relation with cladding, it then set up the Mortgage Lending and Cladding Working Group, of which David and Chris are both members, and then subsequently members of the new working group, which is the Cladding Stakeholder Group. I think the key thing to note is that everything that David and Chris has highlighted, these have all contributed to some of the challenges that we've been facing. But in terms of what the government is doing, we received the first tranche of monies from the UK government. I think it was at the early stage of 2021, and that was for 97.1 million. So the first thing that we did was utilise that money to deliver on the recommendations from that ministerial working group for mortgage lending and cladding, and the main one was the introduction of the single building assessment. And again, coming back to something that Chris had said, there's a lot of uncertainty about what is actually on a building.
Yeah.
And equally, not just what's on a building, but how the building was constructed and the fire safety measures, not just within the building and not just on the building, but also within the building. So one of the key things that the single building assessment does is it integrates both an internal fire risk assessment as well as an external wall assessment. And the Scottish Government is committed to delivering this free of charge for homeowners, and the Cabinet Secretary has reiterated that in the Chamber. And so from our perspective, we embarked on this programme just over a year ago in June of last year, and that's when we started the pilot of approximately 26 buildings. And in May of this year, the Cabinet Secretary also announced that we would be expanding that pilot with another 80 buildings. I think in terms of coming back to Chris's point about timescales, absolutely the timescales are quite long, but I think the reason for the timescales being quite long at the moment is because we had originally selected 25 of the highest risk buildings, and because of the highest risk nature of those buildings, the inspection threshold is quite high. And so as a result, the time taken to actually get a comprehensive risk-based review of that building does take a long time. So I think for some buildings that may be simpler buildings may actually be able to be assessed quicker. So we're expanding the kind of ranges of options and types of assessment, and we're exploring those with the fire risk assessors, specifically the fire engineers, as well as fire risk assessors who are surveyors. So we're trying to work with industry professionals about a graded approach towards fire risk assessment, appropriate to the building. So we're working with industry professionals to try and assess risk appropriately, but equally we're trying to assess risk so that homeowners can be assured that when we've actually looked at a building, that they themselves are fully aware of what the risks are, and then we can work with factors and homeowners about making decisions about the correct course of action for their building, because every building really is different and has been constructed differently and has different risks. So the key thing is that homeowners are pivotal to making those decisions, because after all, it is their building, and they are the ones who should be making those decisions around what they're prepared to have changes made to their buildings, and not. So to come back to how things are going, so we are still in that pilot stage, and the reason for that is because the single building assessment being much more stringent in terms of a traditional fire risk assessment, and we are bringing the industry professionals with us on that journey, and there's a bit of learning on their side, there's learning on our side, and as David has alluded to, we were heavily relying on property factors in the beginning to help shoulder some of the burden of helping move things forward. But as the Cabinet Secretary said on the 12th of May in Parliament, we've recognised that actually, that factors have done a huge amount of work, and it was going beyond that kind of scope of service that they were traditionally a part of. Sure. And so that's why she had announced on that day that we would be expanding the pilot and actually introducing a new method of delivery, and that was directly procuring. The Scottish Government will actually directly procure single building assessments with fire engineers and surveyors, or appropriately qualified surveyors, and then that helps us alleviate some of the burden on property factors. So ideally, the way the process should work now is we would anticipate that the property factors would still gather consent from homeowners in those buildings, because we do need the consent of homeowners in order to proceed with inspection works, because especially if those inspection works require intrusive inspections. So from that perspective, we still need consent, but what we've cut out of the equation at the moment now is that property factors could then step away from having to be involved in complex project management of single building assessments. And so as a result, we would take on that burden and actually directly work with those fire engineering firms. And what, in terms of coming back to Chris's point about communications, I think the real challenge for us is the hesitation, I suppose, is from our perspective, is we want to be able to go out to homeowners when we've got, as you would say, a completed product of a single building assessment, where we could actually say with absolute clarity, industry's on board, the mortgage lending market is on board, insurance market is on board, developers are on board as well, and all of that is taking time to get all of those jigsaw pieces in place. However, what we have got is what the Cabinet Secretary announced as well, is that we are working with industry on the development of a Scottish Safer Buildings Accord, and that's where we're bringing together developers who've got associated connections with buildings and working with them to help complete assessments of buildings, as well as moving towards remediation. So I know it's taken an awful lot of time to get to this stage, but I really do anticipate that the building blocks are in place, and ideally once everything is agreed and we can then end the pilot, then we should be in a position to make much better progress, especially with industry buy-in and obviously with an increase in the number of fire risk assessors that the Royal Institute for Chartered Surveyors are training up at the moment. Yeah. So we do have capacity issues in the market, but we are endeavouring to actually alleviate these problems. Hope that gives you a nice summary.
It does gives me a great summary. Thanks very much for that. It kind of brings everything together for us. So going back to David, the single building assessment pilot, could you share your perspectives on this and what this year will mean for people in terms of those assessments?
Well, obviously, the biggest part of that is that out of that single building assessment, the homeowners want to be able to get an EWS 1 form that allows them to be able to sell or remortgage their property. That is the bit that's making this whole jigsaw puzzle come together, because at the moment there's an awful lot of people out there who are in that position, as well as potentially in an unsafe building. I guess as Hardip is aligned to, you kind of touched on it, certainly from our point of view, but this is really stage one, because stage two could identify serious issues with the building which require remedial works. There may be an option to carry out mitigation. So really stage two is once you've identified what the problem is via the first stage of the SBA, then the biggest challenge for everybody involved is if there is remediation required, how is that likely to be funded? And Hardip, you touched on a couple of things there, and in fairness, I have to highlight this as a case study, and I've used it on numerous occasions. We have a development in Edinburgh, and it's 400 flats. Now, every time we called an AGM in 14 years, the most we ever had at it was about 19 people. Now, the quorum to make decisions on that development is 123, I think, from memory. Now, you call a meeting about cladding and knowing that there's a localised Facebook page, everybody's aware that people can't sell their flat, people are struggling to remortgage, and you call that meeting in an attempt before the SBA started just to get a fire safety audit carried out. Now, you would have expected that the interest in that would have taken us to the numbers required to be queried at that meeting, and we got 29.
Wow.
That apathy is driving a lot of this as well, and without without the involvement to the level that Hardip's aligned to, this would still be at a standstill. And that's the bit that's the issue about people feeling their way through this. There's a number of other issues involving other stakeholders, whether it's UK lenders, whether it's RICS, whether it's the buildings insurers, home builders themselves. But for me, the whole thing centres around how do you get by the apathy issue, and now we seem to be going in the direction. So for me, going forward, there's still quite a lot of challenges and hurdles to overcome to get to where we need to get to. One of the biggest things for me, and it perhaps comes on to your last question, and that's, you know, what should happen in the future. I'll touch on it, and whether Hardip wants to pick up on it is obviously there's been discussions about a central register. Now, this is something even before cladding that I've been banging a drum about, because every time we take a building, we take handover a building, we refuse to take handover from a home builder until we get the O&M manuals and all the details specific to that building. Now, and then the other issue we've got is when we take it off and we get awarded a site from another property factor, we don't get that information coming across because they sometimes don't have it. So by creating a central register for EWS buildings that have passed through the SBA and are green lighted as being safe, you could actually, and I spoke to a law commission about this, you could actually have a tie-up on that central register which puts all the O&M manuals in there, puts all the home reports in there. Now granted, that needs facilitated and it needs managed, but I always work in the theory of where's the intangible cost, and there must be a huge amount of intangible cost going on behind the scenes trying to tie all this up, and the cladding is a classic example of it. So from any challenge there's always opportunity, and from opportunity there's solutions. So I'm maybe going a bit off piste there, but certainly I think there's an opportunity to tie up several challenges in the house building marketplace as we come out the other end of this. But yeah, going forward, we're getting through stage. Certainly, our most dangerous buildings are getting through stage one, but the big one's yet to come, and that's right. Okay, now we know that it's not a green development; it's a red development. It needs remediated, it needs mitigated. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it if apathy exists? Some of it may be at the door of the home builders, some of it may not. The accord system may bring the home builders back to the table, and that's again probably there's a whole bundle of legal complexities in there, because we've certainly got one development where it was a JV between three parties.
Wow. Okay.
And one of which has come back to the table, the other one has not engaged, and the other one hasn't even raised their head. So there's numerous complexities still out there, and numerous challenges and hurdles to go over, and that's what will cause delays. And to Chris's point, that he recognises, having sat and listened to the work that was on the group that we're all on, you can see that as you get over one hurdle, you come up against the hurdle that's nailed down, and you have to start screwing out the safety catches before you go over the next stage. So I don't know if Chris and Hardip would agree with that assessment.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, the big question always is that, you know, who is going to pay for it all, isn't it? So, Chris or Hardip, do you want to come back on anything that David's just said, or do you want to just answer the question as well yourself?
Well, shall I just come in on the bit about consent and so on, which is I fully sympathise with David. We have about 278 properties in my own development. The quorum at the minute, although we're just about to change the deeds, we hope, if we can get enough people to do it, is 50%. Historically, when we've had in-person meetings, we've had up to about 52%, 49%. So you can get people turning out on a night, and actually the business you undertake, actually it's not core. So, hey, you know, was there any point? And I'm sure there was a point, but, you know, in terms of legality. But in terms of getting consent for an SBA, two things. We still have people. We actually had someone, I think about 6 weeks ago, bearing in mind we are in the middle of an SBA, or asking, what's an SBA? So that kind of gives an indication of the level of engagement of some of the owners, and especially where you have absentee owners who are essentially landlords who've let properties out and are living elsewhere and really just want to rake the money in, and they don't engage. So that is a big problem. I think David probably said he's found that across his properties too. I don't know, but that is huge. So in terms of getting consent, we actually did a survey. We actually sent a survey to every homeowner. And even that, we were struggling at the 50%. But out of the people who replied, we had an overwhelming assent to carry out the work. And I think 2 people against, something like that. We didn't get 100%. We never will. But that seemed to work. And it does seem to actually give a really good basis for ongoing work and actually engaging in the SBA. And very, very few people are unhappy about having an SBA. But we use this term SBA, as we have done throughout this podcast all the time, and people understand it's a single building assessment. They don't understand what that involves. They don't understand the risks, i.e. it might show things that you just really you hoped you wouldn't find. So it's like going to the doctor for, you're not feeling well, and you go along and they kind of give you some bad news. I'm afraid this is serious. You're going to have an operation. Oh, I wish I hadn't known. If I hadn't come to the doctor, I wouldn't have known. Yeah. And it's just like that we've got buildings that we know were constructed. Some of them were constructed badly and not in accordance with building regulations. Some of them were in accordance with the regulations at the time, but they are still high risk. So the thing is, people are scared of what they might find out, scared of the implications for them in terms of cost. And I know we'll deal with that later because there is a kind of plan for that. But even so, these are the things that put people off from engaging once you've actually got them engaged. So we are now at the situation where we actually have got, and I think we talk about safe and unsafe. I think the insurers have used the term high risk and low risk, which is perhaps a better description. So we're at the point of trying to assess where is our building high risk? Is it low risk? What needs to be done? Okay, this is about the cladding on the walls. Oh, well, no, it's not. It's actually more than that. So in common with many offices, hospitals, residential homes and private properties, we have a car park which is underneath our building. When we first started talking about cladding in, I think 2018-19, we weren't particularly thinking of things like that. But then you've got car parks, and then the fire assessor will say, hold on a minute, how are you going to get a fire engine in there if there was a fire under the building, which is where the gas comes into the building, which is where there are ducts ventilating the building? How are you going to deal with this? Now, that's not only for residential buildings, that actually applies to many, many properties. So now that's a whole different ballgame. And so people have signed up for an SBA, think, it's about the cladding. Oh, well, actually, it might be about the car park. Yeah. Well, we didn't think we were signing up for that. Well, we didn't understand. I didn't, speaking personally, I didn't understand the implications of that. And so that is why the pilot scheme, as Hardip has said, it is complex. They're looking at big buildings with big issues. And there are a lot of interconnected issues, which are far more interconnected than we thought they were, and have implications for deciding whether a building is high or low risk. So that is an issue. And, we've just got to somehow work our way through that.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, I had a conversation, we did a podcast the other week actually about EV charging, actually, electric vehicle charging, and the possible fire risk of having EV chargers in car parks on the buildings and things like that. And it was a fascinating conversation. So I get what you're saying. That could show up anything and not what you're thinking it would. Hardip, do you want to? I know you touched on the single business assessment when you first spoke, but do you want to come back on anything that David or Chris have said on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just to say that 100% agree with actually everything that they both highlighted. Consent is a massive challenge for us as well in terms of delivering this programme. Unfortunately, the law is the law, and so from that perspective, we have to comply with the law, comply with title deeds, and so from our perspective, we are here to support the homeowners in achieving what it is that they're looking for, which is an assessment of their building, and in the delivery of that single building assessment, we do need consent, and I don't think there's a way of getting around that. I think it's just a case of we're just going to have to work through this as best we can. I think in terms of coming back to one of Chris's points about complex buildings and so on, this is very much on a building by building basis, and as I said, because we are looking at the holistic fire risk issues of that building, Chris is absolutely right. We are uncovering all sorts of issues with the building that people didn't necessarily realise were related to cladding, because obviously fire does spread and it can go into car parks and so on, and then subsequently has huge impacts on other aspects of how buildings function. Yeah. So the assessment in and of itself will deliver a very comprehensive review of the fire risk associated with a building. But the bigger the building, the more you're going to find. And again, that does have impacts on timescales. So consent has an impact in terms of getting started. And then equally, as you go through the process of assessing the building, as more and more things become uncovered, it actually delays the completion of the final report. Yes. Because what a fire risk assessor will do is they will take each individual fire risk element of a building and then make a holistic assessment of the building in the round. And in order to do that, they do literally need to be quite granular in detail when it comes to looking at that fire risk. So I mean, it's just I would 100% agree with everything that Chris and David have mentioned there in terms of the challenges.
Okay. Thanks for that. We actually had, I remember interviewing Annie Flint on this podcast actually, and she was adamant that the home report was not good enough for people. I know this is off a cladding conversation, but absolutely adamant the home report was just absolutely not going far enough and needed to go further, because it was only talking about the actual unit or flat that was being looked at, and actually an entire building kind of report should be there so that people are aware when they're buying of everything else that's going on in the building and not just that unit. And David touched on it earlier about a register, and it certainly does seem that in the future that would be a wonderful idea for something to do.
That, Brian, is something that's getting looked at in a separate working group at Scottish Government, where they're looking at building audits, which would capture fire safety audits as mandatory. Yeah. Because when you look at the insurance companies will make a recommendation that every 3 to 5 years you carry out a valuation of the building to make sure that it's obviously at the set sums. But one of a drum I've been beating for years is that building audit would assist in home reports, assist in avoiding the slums of the future, because then people will realise what it will take to upkeep and maintain the development to a standard and avoid falling into a state of disrepair. And on top of that, the other recommendation was maintenance funds is mandatory, because they don't have any maintenance fund and don't have any way of dealing with large-scale improvement works when it comes champing at your door years down the line. So that is certainly something else that's moving forward.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, I have one more. Oh, I heard a dog barking. It's not mine for a change. Just coming to the last question, is enough being done to help everyone involved in this process? Now, David and Chris, you're more involved in touch with people who are directly affected. So I'll just come back to you, David, first again. What experiences can you share within that?
Yeah, I mean, Chris has already touched on it. Unfortunately, the factoring industry has a stigma attached to it. So anytime you put out a piece of communication, people second guess as to what your underlying money-making scheme is in it. And it's not the way. The industry's moved on massively since those days. Granted, there is still, unfortunate, there'll be some companies out there that maybe don't follow the rules to the letter, but that's why the Property Factors Act's there, and the code's there to make sure that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. However, that's the reason why the membership firms are absolutely requesting communication to go out from a trusted voice, a trusted brand, if you like Scottish Government, to advise homeowners of what's happened to date. Now, Chris aligned to something earlier on. We do that regularly. I share the content of meetings, the Cladding group meetings with the other members, and update them regularly, and then I'll use the same information and distribute it as best we can in layman's terms to our groups of homeowners. So the communication is absolutely vital for us now. Not only what's went on in the past, where we're at, where we're going, and likely to go. But I have to say I do recognise Hardip's point that we've always spoke about. This is a situation that moves weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, and more so in the beginning. It was week to week. You would think you were up to date, and then the next week you would find out things had moved on again. So it's just finding a way in which maybe a blog, I don't know, Scottish Government blog, something along those lines, that there's just small updates that can continuously be updated. Would be good. The central register for me is something that I feel quite strongly about, and I do think a join up of many stakeholders in that would solve a lot of problems that have existed for a long time, between local authorities, Scottish Government, private firms, factors. There's the estate agents. There's an awful lot that can be done there, done right, and perhaps part funded by all organisations. I don't know, but it's worth a thought. And as I aligned to earlier on, I spoke to the Law Commission because I was involved in the Law Commission with what I just talked about: building audits, maintenance funds, X, Y, and Z. And I said, well, you should be talking to these people over here and just getting a bit of join up between these things, because they're all relative and all form part of the jigsaw puzzle. And then probably the other challenge we've got, but to be fair, Hardip and his team have been addressing it, and that's asking factors to sign grant funding letters on behalf of clients, because we then have to go back again and seek their agreement to the factor to be able to sign grant funding letters on their behalf, on behalf of the co-proprietors. And there's a bit of there's whether we like it or not, there's some legal exposure in there. Certainly we had our solicitors look at the grant funding detail. When I say grant funding, that's a grant funding for the fire audits to be carried out. And then the last point that needs some consideration, and I'm not up to date with it, but if we're asking home builders to come back, and they do come back and they're reviewing the building, what independent view has been taken on that? Is it Scottish Government? Is it a subcontracted firm to Scottish Government that will be analysing what it is they're reporting on? Because, not that I'm suggesting they would, but there is opportunity there if something is highlighted that is a major exposure and a major cost. You'd like to think that morally that wouldn't be the right thing to do, but you never know. So that's probably the four things that I would like to see probably evolve going forward rather than improve, because I absolutely understand some of the complexities, whether it's apathy, whether it's legalities or other. Then I recognise it. It's just finding a way around it.
Yeah. I mean, that last point you meant, and I think you've mentioned this to me before, there's an element of marking's one's own homework in that respect, isn't it? And nobody would ever allow anyone to do that. So yeah. Okay, Chris, I know you've touched on a lot of this already, but is enough being done to help everyone involved in this process? Do you have anything else you want to pitch in?
Well, I've already said, I think I understand the government's point that they want to come with a package to tell people this is what's happening. But that's a bit like waiting for good news. So it's a bit like, in the Second World War, that you don't announce anything until the war's over. It's kind of, but we're in the middle of a war, and the trouble is the people who are affected in the war, the people who, if you like, are in the trenches, are the people who are living in the homes. And if they don't know anything, even if there isn't a lot to know, we need to communicate to them. And I've already bashed on about this. I could talk about it for half an hour, but there needs to be a way to get something. We did, as a group, High Rise Scotland, we put out a précis and a flow chart on our site after the Scottish Government's, or the Secretary's statement in May, which was well received. And it wasn't promising that everything was being done. It was a factual, this is where we're at. And so something needs to come out, and I think that there is a good team at ScotGov that you need to get something into people's hands, and there is a way, whether it is by giving that communication. And I think David's point about branding, if it comes from ScotGov, it's their letter going to people, but it's the factors who send it to the individual owners. If you act like acting as the postman, I think we need to get something. I mean, we needed to get something into people's hands before Christmas, and we've now got Christmas cards in the shop. So we need to get on with this and have something. We can't wait to have the perfect product. We need to get something to people now, and that will at least show people that there's someone caring about them, which is a big thing, because people are questioning motives, as they always do. Social media is a nightmare. People are always questioning, what's in it for these people, because they couldn't organise anything, da-di-da-di-da. But to allay that, we need to say something, even if it is, look, we haven't got the answers. This is a big problem. This is where we're at the moment. And we'll issue you another update in, 4 months, say 3 times a year or something. Because this thing is going to go on for years. We are going to be talking about remediation and stuff, for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, because of the time it's going to take to get some of these things done. So we need to have something in layman's speak, accurate, short, but actually tells people where they're at. And if they've had one, 2 months ago, say, I still don't know what's happening. We'll get another one in a couple of months. At least people have got something, to hang their hat on. So, that's a biggie, a very biggie.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Chris. And Hardip, just to finish off, I don't know if you have any views on is enough being done to help everyone involved in the process, but also how do government employees humanise what is happening to people's lives would be a good thing to ask you.
So I suppose in terms of is enough being done, the straight answer to that one is we are trying our best to get things done as quickly as possible. However, you're absolutely right. It's not that not enough is being done. It's more that we are doing what we're doing. And I really like Chris's analogy there about war and how we're not going to tell anybody about the war until we've won it. And he's absolutely right there. And it's really pivotal. Actually, what we need to do more of is, lots of morale boosters, I suppose. Yes. Being able to, as Chris is saying, communicate out, because we have been doing an awful lot of good work. I think we've just we've been so preoccupied with not trying to build expectations because we know what we want as a final outcome. That's been clearly articulated in the mortgage lending and cladding, working group's report and its recommendations. So we do know where we're trying to get to. I think the real challenge is there's a lot of different moving parts, some of which are ours to own. So, for example, the communication angle, and I take your point, David and Chris, that we do need to spend more time communicating. However, we've tried to offset that by spending more time delivering. So we're trying to push forward with all of these 26 buildings in the pilot and the other 80 buildings. But you're absolutely right, Chris. Maybe we need to just take stock and communicate more to the wider public. So 100% take that one on board. And in terms of the human angle, as you say, Brian, I think that can't be stressed enough. Our primary factor is about keeping people safe in their homes, and from that perspective, again, we're not trying to alarm people, because we do firmly believe that the building standards in Scotland, which have been much more strict than those across the UK since approximately 2005, we do anticipate that the scale of the problem isn't as large as, say, the scale in England. However, that doesn't make life any easier for people living in these homes. So our real approach is get this single building assessment pilot completed, make sure that industry accept the outcomes, coming back to something that I think David mentioned, which was around developers doing their own assessments or anyone doing their own assessments. It's all about industry respecting the consistency of the standards that we are trying to embed. And with those consistent standards, it means that actually there'll be much more acknowledgement from industry that industry's got it right. So from that perspective, in theory, in the future, it shouldn't really matter who commissions an assessment on the building. It should be done to the consistent standard.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, again, because it's these are buildings owned by the homeowners can hold whoever does that assessment to account if the assessment isn't correct. So the power really does rest with the homeowners, and our role here in government is to support that work and help try and navigate through some of those barriers. And that's really what we're working through at the moment. But I take your point, Chris. Absolutely, we do need to work with you and with David to improve that support and improve that communication out to factors as well as homeowners.
Yeah. Okay, well, gents, that's been really useful. I think one good thing that was, we've done this on a couple of podcasts. I think we should come back in a year's time and see where we are and see where we've moved to and how much progress has been made. And I think that'd be really, really useful in a way to timestamp it as well on this podcast. David, I'm sure you'd come back on, but do you have anything to add just before we wrap up?
No. The only thing I noted down, which is related but unrelated, and probably again comes back to what you're saying, Brian, is that I've been banging another drum at Property Managers Association Scotland about how we educate the homeowners as to Chris touched on it. One of the biggest challenges in our industry is predominantly downsizers, first-time buyers, getting the first introduction to factoring, not having a purchasing or solicitor clearly explain what their responsibilities are as duty holders. Yeah. But it does have an effect on this as well, because if we can get that message out there, however we do it, via podcasts, via even adverts, we've been talking about doing things like that to try and make sure that Scotland is educated, that it's not leasehold, there is no landlord here, that is a collective bunch of landlords and duty holders that are responsible for ensuring that their development is properly maintained and managed. And if we can look and assess legislation, because there's massive learning curves through this whole process. It's such a massive thing that has highlighted that challenge. So for us, I think everybody can do more in communicating exactly what factoring is all about and where the responsibilities lie with homeowners.
Yeah, sure.
I've said that to you 101 times before, Brian. So
yeah, we even talk about it on some podcasts. We've stopped doing it though, because we keep referencing you. Chris, anything to add before we finish up?
No, I really just back up David. I think our own factor, I had a conversation with the other day, and we're singing from the same song sheet. We send regular updates to all our owners, some of which are well received and some of which clearly just go straight in the bin or don't even get opened. And her comment was that we ought to have, when we communicate with owners, rather like when the children have their end of term reports, that they have to get a parent to sign it to say that they've read it. And quite clearly, I would say this is a guesstimate in our own owners, and they're probably more responsive than many across Scotland. I would suggest that between 25 and 30% of them simply don't read the emails or letters sent to them.
Yeah,
It's actually quite high. It's actually quite high compared to our analysis that goes out the door for our messaging. So yeah, you're right, Chris. That is particularly high and that gives you a clear indication of where that apathy exists.
Yeah. Thanks. And Hardip, anything to end for you?
No, only other than we should, as Chris and David has said, we will definitely work collaboratively with all of our stakeholders in terms of improving that communication, because there's an awful lot going on in this space, and we are trying our best to move things forward quickly. We've got a lot of barriers, but we will get there in the end. But I think, as Chris said, we've got to get out those morale boosting stories that will help keep people reassured that things are moving in the right direction.
Cool.
And can I just check, Brian, before we go, that Chris has not got a caveat over that phrase about the Second World War, because I intend to use it.
I'm sure you would.
Feel free.
Thank you.
Good. Right, gents, thank you very much. That's been really, really useful. Thanks for coming on, and hopefully our listeners have enjoyed that and got something out of it. And I really do think we should be back in a year and just see how everything has moved on and where we are. So look forward to that as well. Thanks.
Excellent. Appreciate your time, Brian.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.